4,500 years ago, humans did something that modern machines still struggle to explain. They lifted millions of tons of stone, without steel and without electricity, without engines. No cranes, no computers, no blueprints we can read today, and yet, the pyramids still stand. Perfectly aligned and perfectly balanced, still defying time. So the question is not what they built. The real question is, how did they do it? To understand the answer, and we must first understand why they built them. Before the first stone was lifted, before the first line was carved into the desert, before human hands dared to challenge time itself, there was an idea, and an idea so powerful, so absolute, that it reshaped an entire civilization. The belief that death was not the end. In ancient Egypt, and life was only one chapter of a much longer journey. Birth was not the beginning. Death was not the conclusion. Existence flowed forward, from this world, and into the next. To the Egyptians, the universe was fragile. Order could collapse, chaos could return, darkness could swallow creation itself, and standing between order and destruction, was the pharaoh. The pharaoh was not simply a ruler of people. He was the living anchor of reality, and the Egyptians believed that the pharaoh carried divine essence within him. He was the son of the sun god, a bridge between heaven and earth, a living symbol of balance, and this balance had a name: Ma'at, truth, order, harmony, cosmic stability. As long as Ma'at survived, the sun would rise, the Nile would flood, crops would grow, and life would continue. But the moment the pharaoh died, everything was threatened. Because death did not remove his responsibility, it transformed it, and the pharaoh had to continue ruling, even after death. And to do that, his soul had to survive intact. The Egyptians believed the human soul was complex, and it was not a single thing. It was a system. The Ka, the life force, the energy that sustained existence. The Ba, the personality, and the identity that could travel between worlds. And the Aka, the final form, the immortal, divine spirit. But these elements were fragile. Without the body, and they could not reunite. If the body decayed, the Ka would weaken. The Ba would wander, lost, directionless. And the Ak would never be born. And this was true death. Not the stopping of breath, but the erasure of identity. To be forgotten was the greatest horror imaginable. So the body had to be preserved, and not for days, not for years, but forever. This is why mummification existed, organs removed, skin dried, body sealed against decay, but preservation alone was not enough. The body needed protection. Not from time alone, but from nature, from animals, from thieves, from chaos, and it needed a structure that could outlast generations, outlast kingdoms, outlast memory itself. A structure that could not be moved, a structure that could not be erased. A structure built for eternity. This is where the pyramid becomes inevitable. The pyramid was not chosen for beauty, and it was chosen for stability. A pyramid does not collapse inward. Its weight presses downward, locking every stone into place. The heavier it becomes, and the stronger it grows. This shape was not symbolic first. It was practical. Only later did it become sacred, and the Egyptians believed the sun god traveled across the sky each day and descended into the underworld each night. Death, darkness, rebirth, and the pyramid mirrored this journey. Its sides reflected rays of sunlight, solid light, frozen into stone, a ramp for the soul, and the pyramid was meant to guide the pharaoh upward, toward the stars that never set, the imperishable stars, stars that symbolized eternal existence, and inside the pyramid, everything served this purpose. Passages angled toward the sky, chambers aligned with celestial paths. Nothing was accidental, and every measurement mattered. Every stone was placed with intention. The pyramid was not built for people to enter. It was built for the soul to leave, and once this belief hardened into certainty, once faith demanded form, humanity faced a challenge it had never encountered before. How do you build eternity, and out of stone? The belief had been set. The purpose was clear. Now the Egyptians faced a terrifying reality. Belief alone does not stop decay, and faith alone does not defeat time. Stone had to replace flesh, architecture had to replace memory. The pyramid was not only a spiritual structure, it was a defense system, and the desert was chosen deliberately. Dry air slowed decay, sand buried mistakes, distance discouraged intruders, but even the desert was not enough, and the pharaoh's body had to be hidden, and yet accessible to the soul. This is why pyramids were sealed, entrances disguised, passages blocked, false corridors created, and the pyramid was a puzzle, not to confuse humans, but to protect eternity. Inside chambers were positioned deep within stone, not at the center, not at the top, but where pressure was greatest, where stone itself became a shield. The Egyptians understood something fundamental. Time destroys what is exposed, but what is buried and survives. This is why pyramids were not hollow monuments. They were solid mountains with secrets carved inside. Every internal space weakened the structure, and so space was minimized, stone was maximized. The pyramid was built to resist collapse, not just physically, but symbolically. A fallen pyramid would mean failure, and failure of resurrection, failure of Ma'at, failure of order itself. This is why perfection mattered. Angles had to be precise, weight had to be balanced, and errors could not be corrected later. There were no second chances. Once the pharaoh was sealed inside, the pyramid could never be changed. It had to be right, and the first time. This urgency shaped everything. Planning began decades before death. Stones were prepared years in advance. Workers were trained across generations, and the pyramid was not built by a moment. It was built by a lifetime, and sometimes by several. To the Egyptians, this was not excessive. It was responsible, and the universe depended on it. A failed pyramid meant instability. A weak tomb meant cosmic risk. The pyramid was insurance against chaos, and chaos was always close, and floods, droughts, disease, war. These were signs that Ma'at was weakening. That balance was threatened. So the pyramid had to stand firm, and no matter what happened above ground, dynasties could fall, cities could vanish, but the pyramid had to remain forever. And this is why pyramids were not repeated endlessly. They were rare, they were costly, they were reserved for those who carried cosmic responsibility, and not every pharaoh received a perfect pyramid. But those who did were expected to rule eternity itself. The pyramid was a promise, not to the people, but to the universe. When we ask why pyramids were built, we are really asking something else. How far will a civilization go to defeat death? How much effort and how much stone, how many lives will humanity sacrifice to be remembered? The Egyptians answered this question with mountains. Mountains shaped by belief, and mountains carved by fear, mountains built for the soul. And once those mountains were planned, once eternity demanded form, a new problem emerged: stone. And before any pyramid could rise, before any belief could take physical form, the Egyptians faced a problem so immense that it still challenges modern understanding. And stone. Not small stone, not decorative stone. Millions of blocks, each weighing tons, some weighing more than a fully loaded modern truck. And the Great Pyramid alone required more than 2 million stone blocks. Each one cut, each one shaped, each one placed with intent. This was not decoration, and this was engineering on a scale humanity had never attempted before. The majority of the stones came from limestone, soft enough to shape, strong enough to endure, but limestone was only the beginning. Deep inside the pyramid, hidden from view, were blocks of granite. Granite is not forgiving. It is harder than iron, and harder than bronze, harder than copper. And yet the Egyptians cut it, not with steel, not with machines, not with power tools. They cut granite using copper tools, and stone hammers, and sand. This is where the mystery deepens. Copper is softer than granite. On its own, it should fail. But sand changes everything. And quartz sand is harder than copper. When trapped between blade and stone, it becomes a cutting agent. Slow, painfully slow, but effective. Each cut took time. Hours and days. Sometimes weeks. This was not speed-based construction. It was patience made physical. Granite blocks used in the pyramid were quarried far away, and more than 800 kilometers south, at Aswan. Some of these blocks weighed more than 70 tons. 70 tons. To put that into perspective, and modern cranes struggle with this weight. Yet the Egyptians moved these stones with ropes, sleds, and human strength. The quarries at Aswan still exist today, and they tell a silent story. Partially cut blocks remain in the bedrock, abandoned mid-process. Why were they left? Because the stone cracked, or fractured, or failed, and which tells us something important. The Egyptians were not using magic. They were using trial and error. They understood stone intimately, and they knew where it would split, where it would resist, where it would fail. This knowledge was not written down. It was passed from hand to hand, and from generation to generation. Quarrying was dangerous. One mistake could cost lives. Stone blocks were separated from bedrock using wooden wedges, and these wedges were soaked with water. As the wood expanded, the stone cracked along controlled lines. Simple physics, brilliant application. Once separated, and the stone was shaped roughly at the quarry. Not finished, not polished, just enough to reduce weight. Perfection came later. Transport was the next challenge, and the Nile was the key. Stone was moved during flood seasons when water reached closer to the quarries. Boats carried blocks north, using the current. Granite and limestone, sandstone, all flowing toward Giza. This was not chaos, it was logistics, a national project. Workers were organized into crews, crews into teams, and teams into divisions. Food had to be provided, water distributed, shelter maintained. This was not slavery, this was an industrial operation, and evidence found near Giza reveals bakeries, breweries, medical facilities, broken bones that healed, injuries that were treated. These workers were valuable, and because stone was unforgiving, one mistake during transport, and a block could kill dozens. The sleds used were massive wooden frames, the stone placed on top, and ropes attached. But dry sand created friction. So the Egyptians did something clever. They poured water on the sand. This reduced friction dramatically, and modern experiments confirm this. With wet sand, a team could move stones previously considered impossible. Slowly, steadily, day after day, stone by stone. But stone was not just material. It was meaning. The Egyptians believed stone carried permanence, flesh decayed, wood rotted, mud brick crumbled. Stone endured. And that is why temples were stone. That is why pyramids were stone. They were building against time itself. Every block placed was a statement. This will not disappear. But stone had a cost. It demanded planning, coordination, absolute discipline. Quarrying errors could not be fixed later. Once a block was cut, it had to fit. And if it did not, it was discarded. Wasted stone still lies near the pyramids today, silent evidence of failure and success. By the time stones reached Giza, and thousands of decisions had already been made. Where it would go, how it would be placed, what role it would serve. The stone problem was not just about cutting, and it was about foresight. And this was only the beginning. Because cutting and moving stone was one thing. But lifting it, that was another challenge entirely. And once the stone reached the plateau of Giza, the real struggle began. Transport had ended. Now gravity became the enemy. Each block had to be raised. Not once, but thousands of times. The pyramid was not built from the top down. It grew slowly, layer by layer, course by course. The lowest stones were the largest, and the heaviest, the most unforgiving. As the pyramid rose, the margin for error vanished. There was no room to adjust later, no way to correct mistakes once stone was set, and this meant every block had to arrive at the exact moment it was needed. Too early and it blocked progress. Too late and work stopped, and timing mattered as much as strength. The Egyptians solved this with organization. Stone yards surrounded the construction site. Blocks were sorted by size and purpose, and marked, assigned. Nothing was random. Ramps were essential. Without ramps, lifting multi-ton blocks would be impossible. But ramps were not simple structures, and they had to be strong enough to carry weight, wide enough for teams to work, stable enough to avoid collapse. And they had to change constantly, and as the pyramid grew taller, the ramp had to grow with it. This required enormous quantities of mud brick, rubble, and limestone chips, and almost as much material as the pyramid itself. Ramps were built, extended, reinforced, then dismantled and reused. They were temporary tools for a permanent structure, and there was no single ramp design. Straight ramps were likely used early. They ran directly toward the pyramid face. But straight ramps could not rise too steeply, and if they did, friction and gravity would stop progress. This meant a straight ramp would need to be extremely long. At higher levels, this became impractical, and so the ramp evolved. Curved ramps, zigzag ramps, spiral ramps hugging the pyramid's sides. Each stage required a different solution, and evidence of ramp materials has been found, mixed into the pyramid's outer layers. Mudbrick fragments, crushed stone, debris. And this suggests ramps were built directly against the pyramid, then removed as construction advanced. Stone blocks were hauled up these ramps using sleds and ropes, and teams worked in rhythm, pulling together, stopping together. Coordination mattered more than raw strength. If one team slipped, the entire system failed, and ropes were made from flax and papyrus. Strong, flexible, replaceable, they wore out quickly. Hundreds were used and discarded. Wooden rollers are often imagined, but evidence suggests sleds were more reliable. Rollers sink into sand, especially on wet ground. At higher levels, space became limited, and the pyramid narrowed. Work became slower. Smaller teams replaced larger ones. Precision increased. Blocks were adjusted using levers, not lifted, shifted, and millimeter by millimeter. The final casing stones were the most important. These were smooth limestone blocks that covered the pyramid's exterior. Polished, bright, and reflective. When complete, the pyramid did not look rough. It looked perfect. Sunlight reflected off its sides, blinding, almost white. From a distance, and it looked like solid light. These casing stones were set from the top down. The pyramid reached its full height first. Then the outer surface was finished downward, and this ensured perfect alignment. Each casing stone locked the one below it into place. Gravity worked in favor of precision. But placing these stones required extreme care, and a single misalignment would ruin the entire surface. So work slowed further. Measurements were checked repeatedly. Plumb lines, sight lines, simple tools, and extraordinary results. When construction reached the final stages, the ramps were removed. Stone by stone, material reused elsewhere. What remained, and was the pyramid itself. No visible ramps, no scaffolding, just stone. This disappearance of ramps is why their design is still debated. They were never meant to last, and they were tools, not monuments. By the time the final casing stone was set, the pyramid stood complete. Not hollow, not decorative. A solid mass of stone, and engineered to resist collapse. Built to outlast dynasties. The stone problem had been solved, not with shortcuts, not with lost technology, but with organization, and patience, and absolute commitment. Millions of stones, one structure, and yet even after solving how to cut stone, move stone, and raise stone, one question remained, and how did they make it so precise? That mystery still waits. And the stones had been cut. The stones had been prepared. But none of it mattered until the stones could move. And this was the challenge that tested everything the Egyptians knew. Because a stone that cannot move is not a building block. It is a prison. And the pyramids were not built beside their quarries. They were built miles away. Some stone came from nearby limestone beds. But the most important blocks did not. And granite came from Aswan, hundreds of kilometers to the south. This distance was not accidental. Granite was chosen because it endured pressure, and because it resisted decay, because it could protect what mattered most. But granite came with a price. Weight. Some blocks weighed 2 tons, others weighed 20, and some weighed more than 70. To move even one of these blocks required planning, timing, and coordination. The Egyptians had no wheels designed for heavy loads, and no iron axles, no engines. What they had was the Nile. The Nile was not just a river, it was a transportation system. Every year it flooded, and water spread across the land. Channels reached deep into quarries. The Egyptians planned their work around this cycle. Stone was cut during dry seasons, stored, and prepared. When the floods came, the stone moved. Boats were built wide and strong, flat-bottomed, designed for stability. Blocks were loaded using ramps and sleds, and not lifted, dragged. The boats did not fight the river, they used it. The current carried them north. Sails assisted when wind allowed. This was slow movement, but reliable. Entire fleets moved stone together. The Nile turned a nation into a construction site. Once the stone reached the Giza region, and the river did not end the journey. Canals guided water closer to the plateau. Temporary harbors were created. Stone was unloaded, sorted, assigned, but land transport was harder. Sand resisted movement. Dry sand increased friction. It swallowed effort. The Egyptians observed this, and they adapted, and they used sleds made of heavy wood. The stone rested on top. Ropes were tied to the front. Teams pulled together. But something else made the difference. Water, and scenes carved into tomb walls show workers pouring water in front of sleds. This was not ritual. It was engineering. Wet sand compresses, it reduces friction, and it allows sleds to glide. Modern experiments confirm this effect. With water, the force required to move a block drops dramatically, and this discovery turned impossible into manageable. Still difficult, still exhausting, but possible. Hundreds of workers pulled each sled, sometimes more, and they worked in rhythm. Chance kept timing. Coordination prevented collapse. If one group lost balance, the entire sled could shift. Accidents were deadly, and this was not brute force alone. It was teamwork. The movement of stone shaped society. Workers were organized into units. Each unit had roles: pullers, guides, and supervisors. Some prepared the path, others managed ropes, others controlled speed. Food had to be supplied daily. Water had to be available. Medical care had to exist, and this was not chaos. It was logistics on a national scale. The movement of stone was seasonal, predictable, and this allowed planning years in advance, and stones were not moved randomly. Each block had a destination. Size determined placement. Weight determined layer. Purpose determined priority, and the largest stones were moved first, because they formed the base. Smaller stones followed. Nothing was wasted. If a block cracked during transport, and it was reused elsewhere, broken stone filled ramps, filled gaps, supported structure. Failure still had value. The Egyptians understood efficiency. They did not race, and they endured. Some stones took weeks to reach Giza. Some took months. No one hurried. Because haste caused mistakes, mistakes caused death, and stone does not forgive error. The distance traveled by some blocks is one of the greatest achievements of the project. Not because of speed, but because of consistency. Year after year, flood after flood, stone moved north. This movement continued for decades. Children were born, children grew, and children joined the work. This was generational labor. And yet, despite all of this, despite rivers, despite sleds, despite water and coordination, and the hardest part still waited. Because moving stone across land is one thing, moving it upward is another, and that problem would redefine the limits of ancient engineering. The stones had reached the base of the plateau. They had crossed rivers. They had crossed sand, but now they faced the final obstacle: height. The pyramid did not rise suddenly, it grew slowly, layer by layer, course by course, and each new level demanded more effort than the last. A block resting on the ground is heavy. A block being dragged upward becomes something else entirely, and gravity multiplies resistance. Every degree of incline increases the struggle. The Egyptians understood this instinctively, and that is why movement and lifting were never separated. They became one process. The stone was never truly lifted. It was guided, and ramps transformed vertical movement into horizontal effort. This was the only way to fight gravity without machines. The earliest ramps were simple, straight, low, wide, and they allowed heavy blocks to be dragged onto the first layers of the pyramid. As long as the pyramid was short, this worked. But pyramids do not stay short, and as height increased, a straight ramp had to become longer and longer to maintain a workable slope. Eventually, such a ramp would stretch farther than the pyramid itself, and this was inefficient. And the Egyptians knew it. So the ramp changed, it adapted. Instead of running straight, ramps bent. They zigzagged up the sides, and they curved around corners. Some wrapped around the structure like a path on a mountain. This reduced length, maintained slope, saved material, and evidence of these ramps survives indirectly. Fragments of mud brick, limestone chips, debris found pressed against pyramid layers. These were not random, and they were the remains of tools that were never meant to survive. The ramps were temporary. The pyramid was permanent. As each layer was completed, the ramp climbed higher, and as the ramp climbed, the work slowed. At lower levels, hundreds of men could pull a single block. At higher levels, space narrowed. Teams became smaller, and movement became slower. Precision replaced force. Levers became critical. A lever does not lift weight, it redirects it. Using wooden poles and stone fulcrums, and workers nudged blocks into position. A few centimeters at a time. There was no room for haste. If a block slipped at height, it would destroy everything below it, and so each placement was deliberate. Measured, checked, adjusted. Stone dust filled the air. The sound of scraping echoed across the plateau. This was not silence, and this was labor. As the pyramid rose, the work became quieter. Less shouting, more focus. At the highest levels, only the most skilled workers remained, and these were specialists. Men who understood stone behavior. Men who could sense balance by touch. Men who knew when a block was true, before any tool confirmed it. And the stones near the top were smaller. Not because they mattered less, but because they demanded greater control. One mistake near the peak would be visible forever, and the final stages required extreme coordination. Ramps narrowed further, teams worked in shifts. Stone arrived exactly when needed. Too many blocks waiting above and would overload the structure. Too few would stop progress. Timing became critical. This was not chaos. This was choreography. Every movement was planned, and when the pyramid reached its final height, something changed. The goal was no longer to build upward. It was to perfect the surface, and the outer casing stones were the most precise pieces of all. These were cut from fine white limestone, smooth, bright. Each casing stone was shaped so tightly, and that a blade could not slide between joints. They were not stacked, they were locked. These stones were placed from the top downward, and this allowed gravity to assist alignment. Each stone pressed against the one below it, creating tension, stability, unity. The pyramid transformed, and what had once looked like a stepped structure became a smooth geometric form, a mountain of light. Sunlight reflected off its sides, from miles away, and it would have been blinding. When the final casing stone was placed, the ramps had completed their purpose. They were dismantled. Stone by stone, brick by brick, and material was reused elsewhere. Nothing was wasted. This is why no ramp stands today. They were never meant to. Only the pyramid remained, standing alone, solid, complete, and the movement of stone was finished. Not through miracles, not through lost machines, but through patience, planning, and relentless adaptation. And the Egyptians did not conquer gravity. They negotiated with it. And when the last block was set, they had done something unprecedented. They had moved mountains, but now another question waited. A question that still unsettles engineers today. How did they make it so exact? So precise? And that even modern tools struggle to match it. And the pyramid did not rise by chance. It rose by calculation. Every stone that had been cut, every stone that had been moved, now faced a final test. Placement. And because lifting stone was not enough, moving stone was not enough. Stone had to become structure. The pyramid was built from the inside outward, not hollow and not layered randomly. Each course of stone locked the one below it into place. Weight was not an enemy, it was a tool. The Egyptians understood compression, and they knew that stone behaves differently under pressure. That weight, when distributed correctly, creates stability rather than collapse, and the base of the pyramid was laid first, not quickly, not casually. The ground was leveled with extreme care. This alone was a monumental task, and the Giza plateau was not naturally flat. Rock had to be cut down, low areas filled. The final surface was leveled to within a margin of error, and less than the width of a finger. This precision mattered. If the base was imperfect, the entire structure would fail. Once the base was complete, and the first course of stones was placed. These were the largest blocks. They carried the greatest load. They bore the weight of everything to come, and each stone was adjusted repeatedly. placed, checked, lifted again, corrected. This was slow work. But speed was never the goal. Alignment was. And the corners of the pyramid were critical. If one corner drifted, the entire geometry would distort. So the corners were established early and protected throughout construction. Lines were drawn. Sight lines, simple tools. Extraordinary results. The pyramid's shape demanded consistency, and each side had to rise at the same angle. Each course had to be level. This meant constant measurement. Plumb lines were used to check verticality, and levels checked horizontality. These tools were basic, but accuracy came from repetition. Mistakes were not hidden, they were corrected. As the pyramid rose, and the internal structure took form, passages were cut before stone was placed above them. This required planning far in advance. You could not cut a passage later, and once stone sealed it, it was sealed forever. The descending passage was carved directly into bedrock. The ascending passages were constructed as the pyramid rose, and chambers were not centered randomly. They were placed where pressure would be manageable. The king's chamber, made of granite, sat high within the structure, and this was risky. Granite is heavy. Placing it at height created enormous stress. To solve this, the Egyptians used relieving chambers, spaces above the chamber, and designed to redirect weight away from the ceiling. These chambers were not decorative. They were structural solutions, and flat granite beams could not support the load above them alone. So the weight was broken up, redirected outward, transferred down. This is engineering, not guesswork. As layers continued to rise, each stone served two purposes. It added height and it increased stability below. The pyramid became stronger as it grew, and this is why it still stands. Unlike modern buildings which rely on internal frameworks, the pyramid is the framework. Remove one stone, and pressure redistributes, and remove many, and the system fails. Everything depends on everything else. This interdependence required discipline. A stone placed incorrectly and could not simply be adjusted later. It would compromise the structure, so decisions were final. Responsibility was immense. Supervisors oversaw placement, and master builders inspected progress. These were not laborers guessing their way forward. They were following plans. Plans that existed before the first stone was cut, and as the pyramid climbed higher, space narrowed. Movement became restricted. This forced a change in workflow. Stone delivery slowed. Placement became more precise, and every block mattered more. Near the upper levels, workers could no longer rely on mass teams. They relied on skill. Levers became smaller, adjustments became finer, and the pyramid demanded perfection. At these heights, the margin for error was gone. A block out of alignment would stand out forever. And the Egyptians knew this. And they were not building for their own eyes. They were building for eternity. This is why progress slowed near the top. Days could pass to place a single course, and this was not inefficiency. This was intention. The pyramid was being shaped, not assembled. As the final layers approached, the structure transformed, and what had once been a stepped form became smooth. The casing stones began to define the pyramid's identity. Each casing stone was angled precisely, and they were not rectangular. They were trapezoidal. This allowed them to lock together tightly. The joints were so fine that even today, a blade cannot slide between them, and this was not accidental. The casing stones were the visible face of eternity. They had to be flawless. And they were. By the time the pyramid reached its full height, and its shape was complete, but its perfection was not yet fully revealed. That would come next, because height and structure alone and do not explain the pyramid's greatest mystery. Precision does, and that story begins here. As the pyramid neared completion, the work changed character, and what remained was not force, it was refinement. Every visible surface had to align, every angle had to agree, every line had to converge at a single point in space, and this was not decoration. This was geometry made physical. The casing stones defined the pyramid's final form, and they were cut with precision far beyond what was structurally necessary. They did not simply cover the core. They perfected it, and each casing stone was angled inward slightly. This created a smooth, continuous surface. If even one stone broke alignment, the illusion of perfection would fail, and so each piece was fitted individually. Stone was placed, checked, removed, adjusted, again and again. This work did not move quickly. It did not need to, and the pyramid was already standing. Now it was being finished. The corners were the most critical points. 4 edges, each running from the base to the apex, and these edges had to be straight, not approximately, perfectly. The Egyptians achieved this by constant reference. Sight lines were used across long distances, and corners were checked against the horizon. Simple tools, extraordinary patience. The apex of the pyramid demanded the highest accuracy of all, and every side had to meet precisely. There was no room for correction at the top. If earlier work was flawed, the apex would reveal it, and that is why so much effort was invested below. The final stone at the peak was symbolic. It was the culmination of decades of labor, and some believe it was capped with a pyramidion, a small stone crowning the structure, possibly gilded, possibly reflective. Whether this stone survives or not, and its purpose is clear, it marked completion, not just of construction but of intention. Once the casing stones were in place, the pyramid transformed and the rough core disappeared. What remained was a smooth, luminous structure. White limestone reflected sunlight intensely. At dawn and dusk, the pyramid would glow, and it was visible from great distances. Not hidden, not subtle. A statement in stone. The internal passages were sealed next. Blocking stones were slid into place, and passages closed permanently. These stones were not dropped, they were guided carefully. Once set, they could not be removed. This ensured security and finality, and the pyramid was no longer a construction site. It was a sealed system. Everything that needed to exist inside was already there. The pharaoh's body, and the burial equipment, the symbolic objects. Nothing more would enter. Nothing was meant to leave. From this point forward, the pyramid belonged to time, and the builders did not expect the pyramid to be entered again. It was not meant to be visited. It was meant to endure. This is why its internal spaces are minimal, and this is why access was restricted. The pyramid was not a temple. It was a machine. A machine designed to hold form under unimaginable weight, and for unimaginable lengths of time. When construction ended, the workers did not celebrate with monuments. They returned home. Their names were not carved into the stone, and they did not expect recognition. The pyramid was not built for them. It was built for eternity. Centuries passed. Dynasties ended. Cities changed. Languages evolved, but the pyramid remained. Earthquakes shook the land. Sandstorms buried and revealed. The casing stones were stripped away over time, reused, carried off, and what remains today is the core. And yet even stripped, the pyramid holds its shape. This is proof of the builders' understanding, and they did not rely on the casing stones for strength. They relied on geometry, compression. Everything pushed inward. Everything supported everything else, and the pyramid did not fight gravity. It embraced it. This is why it still stands, while countless other structures collapsed. The final act of building the pyramid, and was not physical. It was conceptual. The Egyptians understood that perfect's not achieved by excess. It is achieved by balance. They balanced material against force, and time against effort, belief against reality. When the last stone was placed, the pyramid became something else. Not a project, a presence. And with that presence established, a deeper mystery emerged. Because standing is one thing. Standing perfectly aligned with the universe is another, and the pyramid had been raised. But now the question shifted. How did they make it so precise that it appears to be part of the earth itself? And the pyramid was not only tall, it was exact. This is the part of the story where certainty begins to fade. Because size alone does not explain the pyramids, and precision does. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north, with an error of less than a fraction of a degree. Not magnetic north. True north, and the direction the Earth itself points toward. Even today with satellites and computers, This level of accuracy is difficult to achieve. Yet the Egyptians did it, and with no compasses, no GPS, no modern instruments. They did it by watching the sky. The stars were their reference. The night sky above ancient Egypt and was clear and unobstructed. No city lights, no pollution. The movement of stars was studied carefully, not for curiosity, for survival, and the Egyptians believed the heavens were eternal, unchanging, perfect. If a structure could align with the stars, it could share their permanence, and they observed circumpolar stars, stars that never set, stars that rotate endlessly around the northern sky. By tracking these stars and marking their crossing points, and they established true north. Not once, but repeatedly. Measurements were checked, night after night. Consistency mattered more than speed. This was not guesswork, and it was astronomy. Once north was established, everything followed. The pyramid's base was aligned to the cardinal directions: north, south, east, west, and each side faced one direction precisely. This was not symbolic. It was structural. If alignment drifted, the geometry would collapse. But alignment did not drift, and the base of the Great Pyramid is level to within a few centimeters, across hundreds of meters. This is staggering. Modern construction struggles to match this, and without heavy machinery. The Egyptians achieved it by controlling water. Channels were cut around the base, filled with water. Water finds level naturally, and by marking the water line, they established a perfectly level reference. Rock above the line was cut away. Low areas were filled. This method was simple, and nearly flawless. Once the base was leveled, the angle of the sides was fixed. The pyramid rises at an angle that remains consistent from bottom to top, and not approximately. Exactly. This required constant checking. Every new course had to match the angle established at the base. If even one layer drifted, and the error would multiply. But it did not. The pyramid's sides remained straight over their entire height. This is not coincidence. It is control. And stone joints tell another story. Blocks were fitted so tightly that even today, a thin blade cannot pass between them. This is not because the stones were perfect, and they were not. It is because they were adjusted. Each block was shaped to fit the stones around it. Not standardized, customized. This took time, but it eliminated gaps, then gaps are weakness. The Egyptians understood this. Pressure moves through stone. If joints are uneven, pressure concentrates, cracks form, collapse begins, and so joints were perfected. Granite blocks inside the pyramid show even greater precision. These stones are harder, more resistant, yet their surfaces are flat, smooth, and some are polished to a mirror finish. This is not decoration. Flat surfaces distribute load evenly. The king's chamber is a masterpiece of precision. Its walls are square, and its corners are true. The granite beams above it are placed with purpose. Each layer redirects weight outward. Above the chamber are relieving spaces, and these were not discovered until modern times. They were hidden intentionally. Their function is purely structural. They prevent the chamber from being crushed, and this is engineering, not ritual. The pyramid also encodes mathematics. Its perimeter relates to its height in a way that approximates constants we still use today, and whether this was intentional or incidental is debated. But the relationships exist. The pyramid's proportions are not random. They are consistent. They repeat, and they suggest planning beyond basic construction. The pyramid also responds to the earth itself. It sits on stable bedrock, not loose sand, and its weight is distributed evenly. This minimizes movement over time. The structure settles without shifting. This is why cracks are rare. This is why the pyramid endures, and everything about the pyramid suggests foresight, not only for decades, but for millennia. The builders did not ask if it would stand. They asked how long it would stand, and the answer was clear. As long as stone exists. This level of precision forces a difficult question. Was this knowledge rare? Or was it common among master builders? And was it unique to one project, or part of a larger tradition now lost? We do not know. What we do know is that this precision was achieved without modern tools, and which means the tools we value are not the only path to accuracy. Understanding can replace technology. Observation can replace machinery. Patience can replace power, and the pyramid is proof of this. And yet, even with everything we can measure, one mystery remains. How did thousands of people maintain this level of precision and over decades of construction? That question leads us deeper, into the people themselves, and into the system that made this possible. Precision on this scale, and does not come from talent alone. It comes from structure. The Great Pyramid was not built by chance gatherings of workers. It was built by a system, and a system designed to eliminate error. Thousands of people worked on the pyramid, but not all of them touched stone. Roles were divided carefully. Some measured, and some marked, some cut, some placed, some inspected. No single person controlled the entire process. Control was distributed. This prevented mistakes from compounding, and when one group finished a task, another group verified it. If an errored, work stopped. Correction came before progress. This discipline was essential, and because precision cannot be rushed, the builders used reference points constantly. Strings were stretched across surfaces. Plumb lines hung from edges, and sight lines extended across the horizon. These references never changed, they anchored the work. Even as years passed, the reference remained the same, and this allowed consistency across generations. A worker who began his life on the lower courses might never see the pyramid completed. But the system ensured continuity, and the measurements did not live in memory, they lived in practice. Stone by stone, the pyramid repeated its own logic. This repetition created reliability, and once a method worked, it was preserved, not written, but demonstrated. Knowledge moved through hands, not through books. This made it resilient. If one person failed, and the method survived. The builders also understood tolerance. Not every stone had to be perfect, but critical stones did. The core blocks could vary slightly, and the casing stones could not. Granite beams could not. Key junctions demanded absolute precision. This prioritization mattered. It allowed speed where speed was safe, and perfection where perfection was required. This balance made the project possible. The pyramid was also built symmetrically. Work happened on multiple sides at once, and this prevented uneven loading. If one side rose too quickly, stress would shift, so progress was balanced. The pyramid grew evenly on all sides, and this reduced structural risk. It also preserved alignment. Symmetry enforced accuracy. Time itself became a tool. The Egyptians did not fight seasonal changes, and they used them. Flood seasons slowed quarrying, but improved transport. Dry seasons accelerated placement, but limited movement. This rhythm created natural checkpoints, and progress paused, plans were reviewed, errors were corrected. The pyramid advanced in stages, not continuously. This prevented long-term drift, and precision also came from humility. The builders did not assume correctness. They checked constantly. If something felt wrong, it was examined. If alignment seemed off, and it was remeasured. There was no pressure to rush completion. The pyramid was meant to last forever. A few extra years meant nothing, and this mindset is difficult to imagine today. Modern construction values speed. Ancient construction valued endurance. The pyramid reflects this difference. And another factor in precision was limitation. Without advanced tools, the builders relied on what they could trust, their senses. Sight, touch, balance, and a stone that felt wrong often was wrong. A surface that looked uneven usually was. This sensory feedback guided decisions. Modern tools can obscure this connection, and ancient builders lived inside it. They knew stone intimately. They could hear it, feel its resistance, sense its balance. This awareness replaced instrumentation, and precision was not imposed on the stone. It emerged from understanding it. This is why the pyramid feels organic, not mechanical. Its accuracy does not feel forced, and it feels inevitable. As if the structure could only exist in this form. And yet, even with all this discipline, the precision of the pyramid still exceeds expectations, and it suggests knowledge beyond trial and error. Knowledge refined through generations. perhaps lost because it was never written, and perhaps unnecessary after the age of pyramids ended. Civilizations change priorities. What one era perfects, another abandons. The pyramid remains as evidence of a peak, and not of technology, but of understanding of stone, of weight, of geometry, of time, and most importantly, of patience. The pyramid teaches us, and that precision does not require speed. It requires restraint. It requires the willingness to stop, and correct, and wait. This is why the Great Pyramid, and does not feel ancient. It feels deliberate, as if it were placed there rather than built. This sense of inevitability is what fuels modern debate, and because when something is this exact, it invites questions. Were the builders simply careful? Or did they know something we no longer do? And that question has opened the door to many alternative explanations, some grounded, some speculative, some extraordinary. And that is where the story now turns. And for centuries, one idea dominated the story of the pyramids: that they were built by slaves. It is a powerful image, endless lines of broken men, chains, whips, and suffering carved into stone. But this image is wrong. Archaeology tells a different story. The pyramids were not built by slaves. They were built by workers, and skilled workers, organized workers, paid workers. Near the pyramids of Tyre, settlements have been uncovered, not camps, not prisons, villages, and these settlements contained houses, bakeries, breweries, workshops, medical facilities. This was not temporary shelter. This was a functioning community. And the workers who built the pyramids lived close to the site. They ate well. They received medical care. Their injuries were treated, and bones found at Giza show healed fractures, broken limbs that had time to recover. Slaves were not given this care. These workers mattered, and they were fed diets rich in bread, onions, dates, and meat, beef, goat, fish. This level of nutrition was rare in the ancient world. It suggests value, and the pyramid workforce was divided into teams. Each team had a name. Some names were practical, others were symbolic. Names like Friends of Khufu, and Drunkards of Menkaure. These were not the names of slaves. They were the names of groups with identity. Pride mattered. Teams competed with each other, not violently, and productively. Who could place more stone? Who could work more accurately? This competition improved results. Above the teams were supervisors. Above them, and master builders. These were experienced men, highly respected. They understood geometry, logistics, stone behavior. Their role was not physical strength, and it was judgment. The pyramid workforce was massive. At peak times, tens of thousands worked on the project. But not all at once. Many were seasonal laborers, and farmers whose fields were flooded by the Nile. Instead of idling, they worked for the state. This was not punishment. It was participation, and working on the pyramid was a form of service, a duty, and an honor. The pharaoh was believed to maintain cosmic order. Helping build his pyramid, and meant helping sustain the universe. This belief mattered. It motivated people. The workforce was not unskilled. Stone cutters trained for years, and surveyors learned precision through repetition. Transport teams mastered coordination. Mistakes could kill. Only trained hands were trusted with critical tasks, and women also played roles, not in heavy lifting, but in food production, textiles administration. This was a society-wide effort, and the pyramid was not built by a hidden class. It was built by Egypt itself. Records carved into stone and written on papyrus describe rations, schedules, and assignments, and this was bureaucracy. Organization on a massive scale. The builders were not anonymous. Some were buried near the pyramids. Their tombs were modest, but honorable, and being buried near the pyramid was a mark of status. It meant you contributed to something eternal. This changes how we understand the pyramids, and they were not monuments of oppression. They were monuments of coordination, of belief shared across society. The pyramids required cooperation, and on a level rarely seen before or since. This cooperation did not come from fear. It came from purpose. People knew why they were building, and they knew who they were building for. And they believed the outcome mattered. This belief sustained decades of labor. Children grew into workers, and workers became supervisors. Supervisors trained the next generation. Knowledge did not vanish when one person died. It flowed. This continuity explains consistency, and it explains precision. It explains endurance. When we imagine the pyramids rising, we should not imagine silence broken by whips. We should imagine voices, instructions, and laughter, arguments, life. The pyramid was a workplace, a community, and like any community, it was complex. There were hardships, injuries, exhaustion, but there was also structure. And structure is what makes greatness possible. The people who built the pyramids were not myths. They were not slaves. They were Egyptians, and understanding who they were brings us closer to understanding how the pyramids were truly built. But one question still remains. If humans built them, and with known tools, using known methods, why do the pyramids still feel beyond us? That question leads into speculation, into ideas that challenge conventional history, and into theories that attempt to explain what evidence alone cannot fully satisfy. That is where the final chapter begins. The people who built the pyramids and did not see themselves as extraordinary. They saw their work as necessary. This is important because it explains why the system held together for so long, and the pyramid project was not chaos held together by force. It was order sustained by belief. Every worker understood his place. Every task fit into a larger design, and stonecutters did not question why precision mattered. Transport crews did not ask why timing was critical. The answers were already known, and the pyramid was not just for the pharaoh. It was for Egypt, and beyond Egypt. The workers believed their effort supported the balance of the world, and this belief reduced resistance. It replaced coercion with meaning. When labor is meaningful, endurance increases. And this is why the workforce could sustain decades of effort without collapse. But belief alone was not enough. The system had rules. Shifts were organized, and rations were tracked. Attendance mattered. Absence was noted. Performance was measured. This was administration at scale. Papyrus records show calculations of bread, and beer and meat. These were not gifts. They were wages. The pyramid workforce was paid in sustenance, in stability, in status. Skilled workers received better rations, and supervisors received more. This created incentive. It rewarded mastery. Injuries were treated because injured workers were investments. Training took time, and experience mattered. Losing a skilled stonecutter was costly, so health was preserved. This explains the healed fractures found in skeletal remains, and people were not discarded. They were maintained. The builders also lived with their families. This was not a temporary army. It was a population engaged in long-term work, and children grew up watching the pyramid rise. They learned the rhythm of construction. They absorbed knowledge before ever touching stone, and, by the time they joined the workforce, the process felt natural. This continuity is crucial. It explains how precision was maintained across generations, and the plan did not live in one mind. It lived in the system. When one master builder died, another stepped into place, not guessing, continuing. And the pyramid was not an experiment. It was a continuation of established tradition. Earlier pyramids existed. They were imperfect. They failed. Bent pyramids and collapsed faces. Structural errors. These were lessons. The Great Pyramid is not the first attempt. It is the refined result of previous failures. The people who built it and stood on the mistakes of those before them. This is how progress happens. Trial, error, correction. The Great Pyramid represents maturity, not mystery. And when we remove the myth of slavery, we see something more impressive. A society capable of organizing itself toward a single goal. A society willing to invest decades and into something it would never fully use. This kind of thinking is rare. It requires trust. Trust in leadership, trust in belief, trust in continuity. Without this trust, and the pyramid would have failed. No amount of stone or manpower could replace it. This also explains why pyramid building declined. Not because knowledge was lost, but because priorities changed. Later pharaohs did not command the same belief. Political instability increased. Resources were redirected. The system fractured, and without shared purpose, the project could not continue at the same scale. The pyramids mark a moment when society aligned completely. That alignment is as impressive and as the stones themselves. Understanding who built the pyramids brings clarity. It grounds the story. But grounding the story does not end curiosity. In fact, and it sharpens it. Because even knowing who built them and how they were organized, some details remain unsettling. The scale, the precision, the endurance, and these invite questions. Questions that push beyond evidence. Questions that give rise to alternative theories. Some are imaginative, some are flawed, some are compelling, and they exist because the pyramids still feel larger than their explanation. And so we arrive at the final chapter. Not to dismiss these ideas, but to examine them, honestly, and without fear. And the pyramids invite explanation, but they also invite imagination. Because when something survives this long, stands this precisely, and defies so many expectations, people begin to ask different questions, not how, but what if. Alternative theories did not appear by accident, and they emerged from discomfort. Discomfort with scale, discomfort with precision, discomfort with the idea that ancient people could achieve something that still challenges us. Some theories are grounded in misunderstanding, others in mistrust of mainstream history. A few are driven by wonder, and the most common alternative idea is that the pyramids were built using technology now lost. Advanced tools, advanced knowledge, advanced methods that disappeared. And supporters of this idea point to the precision of stone joints, the size of granite blocks, the accuracy of alignment. They argue that copper tools were insufficient, and that human strength alone could not achieve this. But this argument assumes that ancient people thought like modern ones. They did not. They worked slowly, and they repeated processes. They refined methods over generations. Lost technology is not required to explain patience. Another theory suggests that an advanced civilization existed before recorded history. A culture destroyed by catastrophe, flood, impact, global collapse. The pyramids in this view are remnants, not beginnings. This idea draws strength from gaps in history, periods where written records do not exist. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Civilizations leave traces, tools, settlements, waste. So far, no evidence of a lost global civilization has been found beneath the pyramids. What has been found fits Egyptian culture, names, inscriptions, methods. The pyramids speak Egyptian. Another theory points upward, and literally, the idea that the pyramids were built with the help of non-human intelligence. Visitors from elsewhere, guidance from the sky. This theory thrives on awe, and the pyramids are extraordinary. So the explanation must be extraordinary. But this line of thinking ignores something crucial. Humans are capable of extraordinary things, and when given time, motivation, and structure. Attributing the pyramids to outsiders diminishes the people who built them. It replaces human achievement with mystery. And there is also the idea that the pyramids were not tombs at all, that they served as power plants, energy generators, or machines of unknown purpose, and supporters point to internal chambers, air shafts, electrical-like properties of granite. These ideas are creative, but they lack supporting evidence, and no residue of industrial use exists, no byproducts, no consistent mechanism. The pyramids contain burials, symbolism, funerary context. They fit what we know, and of Egyptian belief. Alternative theories often begin with a valid observation, and then leap too far. Precision becomes impossibility, scale becomes mystery, and skill becomes magic. This leap is understandable, because the pyramids challenge our assumptions. They force us to confront how much can be achieved without modern tools, but challenging assumptions does not require rejecting evidence. In fact, the more we study the pyramids, the more human they become. Mistakes exist, corrections exist, and changes in plan exist. These are not signs of alien perfection. They are signs of human process. Bent pyramids, abandoned quarries, altered designs, and these are fingerprints. Human fingerprints. The pyramids are impressive, not because they are impossible, but because they are possible through discipline and belief. And alternative theories persist because they serve a psychological purpose. They keep mystery alive. They protect the feeling that the world still holds secrets. And in a sense, they are right. The pyramids do hold secrets, not of who built them, but of how humans organize themselves towards something larger than individual lives. And that is the real mystery. How a society can align belief, labor, knowledge, and time into a single expression. The pyramids are not out of place in history, and they are peaks. Peaks reached when everything aligned. And peaks are rare. When people say, "We could not build this today," they are not talking about technology, and they are talking about will, about patience, about purpose. Modern society could build pyramids, but it would choose not to. The cost would be too high, and the time too long, the benefit too abstract. Ancient Egypt made a different choice. They invested in eternity. That choice produced stone mountains that still speak, and not of aliens, not of lost worlds, but of human potential. And perhaps that is why the pyramids unsettle us. They remind us that greatness does not require speed, and it requires commitment. They stand as proof that belief can move mountains. Literally. And that is where alternative theories fall apart. And because the pyramids do not need to be explained away, they need to be understood on human terms. The final questions about the pyramids are not technical, and they are philosophical. Because once every theory is examined, once every tool is accounted for, once every method is tested, one truth remains. And the pyramids were not built by accident. They were not built quickly. They were not built casually. They were built with intention. Alternative theories often begin and where patience ends. They assume that if something feels difficult, it must be impossible. But difficulty does not mean impossibility. It means commitment, and the ancient Egyptians committed to a goal that extended beyond individual lifetimes. That alone sets them apart. Modern societies measure success in years, and sometimes months, sometimes days. The pyramids were measured in generations. This changes everything. A task that seems impossible in 10 years and becomes achievable in 50. A task that feels unrealistic in one lifetime becomes reasonable across many. The pyramids were not rushed. They were paced, and this pacing allowed methods to evolve, mistakes to be corrected, processes to improve. No single builder knew everything. But together, they knew enough, and alternative theories often underestimate this collective intelligence. They imagine knowledge as a single spark, a secret, a hidden device. But ancient knowledge was cumulative, built slowly, shared practically, refined through repetition. Nothing about the pyramids requires unknown physics, and they require discipline. They require coordination. They require belief. Belief that effort today matters tomorrow. Belief that work now serves the future. And belief that something larger than the individual is worth sacrifice. That belief is rare. And it is uncomfortable to acknowledge. And because it means the pyramids are not unreachable. They are mirrors. They reflect what humans can do when aligned. Alternative theories persist, and because they preserve distance, they keep the pyramids safely beyond us. Alien help, lost civilizations, unknown machines. These ideas protect us and from confronting a harder truth, that we could build them. But we choose not to. The pyramids demand patience that modern life resists. They demand coordination, and that modern systems struggle to sustain. They demand purpose that does not offer immediate reward. Ancient Egypt accepted these demands. That acceptance shaped stone, and when we look at the pyramids today, we often ask how. But the more important question is why. Why did a society invest so much into something that did not produce food and did not produce weapons, did not generate wealth in the short term? Because the pyramids were not economic tools. They were statements. Statements about order and about continuity, about humanity's place in the universe. They said, we believe this world has meaning. We believe time matters. We believe effort echoes beyond death, And that message is carved into every block. And that is why the pyramids endure. Not just physically, but symbolically. They survive earthquakes. They survive erosion. And they survive theft. But more importantly, they survive explanation. No matter how much we learn, they remain impressive. Not because we cannot explain them, but because explaining them does not make them smaller. It makes them larger. The pyramids do not diminish when we understand them. They grow. And they grow into examples of human capacity. They grow into evidence that civilization once aligned completely around a shared vision. That alignment is the real mystery, and it may be the rarest resource of all. The pyramids stand today not as questions, but as answers. Answers to what humans can achieve, and when they choose patience over speed, purpose over profit, eternity over convenience. They are not messages from aliens. They are not remnants of lost worlds, and they are messages from us. From a past version of humanity that believed the future mattered. And as long as the pyramids stand, that message remains. Silent, massive, and unmoving.